Have you ever noticed that if you really chase down the world's scary stories, something deeply strange begins to emerge? The very shape of what frightens us changes completely depending on where we're standing on the map. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack a fascinating mystery. Why do different cultures fear completely different things? We often think of fear as this universal human emotion, right? Just a simple biological response to danger in the dark. But when we look at folklore or literature or even cinema, we see that fear is actually highly localized. It has an architecture, a structure. And today we're diving into why the phantoms that haunt one nation are entirely different from the terrors that stalk another. Just consider the stark contrast between these cultures. Japan and Britain absolutely adore their ghosts. They love stories of lingering spirits, apparitions tied to specific ancient places. But then you look at American horror, and the great fear shifts entirely. The dominant dread over there, it's the demon, and above all, it's the curse. So why does the shape of fear shift so dramatically across oceans? Why does an English ghost calmly haunt an old countryside inn, while an American spirit brings this relentless, inescapable curse? To answer that, we're turning to the Japanese horror writer Yumeaki Hirayama. He offers a brilliant clue in his book, The Structure of Fear. Hirayama presents a really fascinating literary framework that attempts to decode this deep cultural divide. He suggests that our scary stories aren't just random products of our imagination. Instead, they are directly tied to the land we live on and the history buried deep within it. He proposes an argument that gives us two very different threads to exploiting this geographic divide in our nightmares. Hirayama lays out his initial thesis with these two distinct threads. First, we have the ghost. The idea here is that countries with long, war-scarred histories, places where the dead have literally piled up on the land over centuries, well, they tend to breed ghost stories. The sheer volume of the past creates a lingering presence. Conversely, we have the curse. In America, the dead are felt less as individual recognizable ghosts and more as vague, restless spirits. And the true dread attaches to the curse, very often interpreted as the curse of native peoples. Hirayama reads this American dread as a deep-seated guilt. It's the profound unease of living on land taken from others, knowing that victims lie beneath your very feet. But let's pause for a second. We have to ask ourselves a fundamental question about that first thread. Is it truly the quantity of the dead that creates a ghost culture? Does simply having a higher historical body count automatically mean a nation will prefer ghost stories? Well, the answer is not quite. And history proves why the math simply doesn't add up. Take a look at Britain. It was hardly a nation spared from battle on its own soil. In 1066, William landed and King Harold fell right there on English earth. Centuries later, the 17th century English Civil War turned the entire country into a massive battlefield. Yet Britain adores its gentle, lingering ghosts. Now let's look at America. America also had its Civil War in the 1860s, one of the absolute deadliest conflicts in its history, leaving mass death across its own soil. So, Britain knew war at home, yet loves ghosts. America carries mass death, yet leans heavily toward the curse. Clearly, the sheer number of the dead cannot be what decides a nation's fear. So, the crucial point is this. If we line those two threads up, a single, much more profound question emerges. How has a society chosen to face its own dead? This reveals a profound literary synthesis. It isn't about the mathematical quantity of the deceased, not at all. It is entirely about the psychological reality of the living. It's about how a society, culturally and spiritually, makes peace with the generations that have passed on, especially those who died in tragic or violent ways. Let's look at how Japan chose to face its dead. Historically, Japan didn't simply fear the vengeful dead. They did something remarkable. They enshrined them. Take the famous example of Sugawara no Michizane. He was a disgraced historical figure, a man wronged in life who was believed to have returned as a vengeful spirit bringing disaster. But instead of trying to banish or destroy him, Japanese society chose to honor him. They literally turned a bringer of disaster into a god. They pacified the wrath by giving it a sacred place, choosing to live peacefully alongside their dead. And similarly, let's look at Britain. In British culture, ghosts are allowed to linger safely. They're woven right into the fabric of the society as stories in old haunted inns and ancient castles. The ghosts aren't usually there to destroy the living. They're practically local residents. Just like Japan, Britain made a kind of peace, choosing to coexist with the departed rather than viewing them as a relentless cursing threat. They gave the dead a comfortable place in their modern world. So putting these cultures side by side, the contrast is absolutely fascinating. Japan enshrines its dead as gods, finding peace and coexistence. Britain lets its ghosts linger in old stories, also finding a kind of peaceful coexistence. But America That relationship is defined by a deep unease, untaken ground. Because the culture hasn't entirely made peace with the history of the land itself, the cultural manifestation becomes one of guilt, a guilt that twists itself into the shape of a curse. Which brings us to the most powerful realization of Hirayama's framework. A society that is uneasy on the very ground it stands upon cannot carry its dead as gods to honor, nor as quaint stories to tell over a pint in an old inn. Instead, it carries them as a guilt it just cannot lay to rest. And that specific, restless guilt, the anxiety of the unsettled past, takes the shape of a curse. It becomes a hostile force, a demon, something that wants to expel the living, because the living feel, deep down, that perhaps they do not truly belong. Of course, it's important to remember that Hirayama's brilliant reading is just that. It's one compelling literary interpretation. It isn't a settled scientific law. But what an incredibly powerful lens it is. It allows us to view our fears not just as cheap jump scares, but as profound cultural mirrors. Perhaps what divides one fear from another is simply whether a people has made peace with their history. A ghost story, in the end, is really just a reflection of how we treat those who came before us. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder today. When you look at the horror movies you love, or the ghost stories that truly keep you up at night, what do they say about you? What do your favorite scary stories reveal about your relationship with the unseen and the history beneath your feet? It's definitely something to think about the next time you feel a chill in the air. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning what lies just beneath the surface.